I took the job because my checking account was at $14.23, and rent was due in 11 days. There wasn't some dramatic reason. No passion for municipal work. No calling to keep the city clean. I was just tired of watching my banking app in that sick, obsessive way, hoping the numbers would change if I stared long enough. November night shift leaf collection sounded simple. Drive around in a truck, suck up leaves, toss them in bags, go home. I pictured myself listening to podcasts under the orange pools of streetlights, cold air in my lungs, the quiet satisfaction of mindless work. They hired me on the spot. Only rule, the supervisor said, sliding a clipboard across the folding table in the public works garage. Bag everything organic. If it rots, it goes in. He held my eyes a second too long when he said it. I remember that now. At the time, I shrugged. Sure, leaves, branches, whatever. Yeah. He drummed his pen on the table. Whatever. Our crew was 4 people. Me, a guy named Benson, who'd been there 3 seasons, a college kid in a faded hoodie everyone just called Kid, and a quiet older man with a nicotine cough whose name I only caught once. Martinez. First week, it was exactly what I expected. We cleared sidewalks after the city's daytime street sweepers piled leaves into damp, slumping mountains. We moved through cul-de-sacs smelling like wet cardboard and exhaust, laughing into the dark, freezing fingers inside cheap gloves, until someone finally remembered to bring those chemical hand warmers. The city at night in November looks dead, but not in a sinister way. Just paused. Halloween decorations sagging, Thanksgiving lights not up yet. Pumpkins collapsing into themselves on porches, everything drying out, curling inward. We'd roll up in the truck, aim the vacuum hose, and watch the leaves disappear in a roaring brown tornado. It was actually sort of satisfying, like erasing a mess with one long, loud breath. Then we started getting special assignments. It was our second week when the supervisor pulled us aside before shift. Got a call from Parks and Rec, he said, flipping through a clipboard. His eyes didn't quite land on us. Storm knocked a lot of debris down in the North Woods Trail. People keep complaining about smell. You 4 are closest, so you're on it. Smell? Benson wrinkled his nose. Like sewer? Like decay, the supervisor said too fast. It's a drainage thing. Bag everything organic. You know the drill. Don't leave piles. He kept saying, you know the drill, like he wanted to skip past the part where we might ask questions. The North Woods Trail wasn't even technically in the city. It was a strip of forest along the river, half city-owned, half county, full of joggers in the summer and forgotten dog poop bags in the fall. By November, it was usually left alone until spring. We drove out there around midnight. I noticed the smell before we even killed the engine. People always describe bad smells like a dead animal, because most people have never actually smelled a human body decomposing. That's a different category. Even if you don't have words for it, your body recognizes it and starts sending up flares. This smell hit the back of my throat, sweet and rotted at the same time, like fruit left in a hot car, but heavier. Damn, Kid muttered, pulling his hoodie up over his nose. What died out here? Couple raccoons and a deer, probably, Benson said, too casually. He cleared his throat. Let's just get it done. We strapped on our headlamps and started down the trail with the big canvas bags and rakes. The vacuum truck couldn't handle the narrow path, so this was old school. Rake, bag, haul. Leaves were piled thick on the path, knee-deep in spots, slick and half-frozen. Our boots made sucking sounds when we pulled them back up. The trees leaned in over us, black lines against a sky with no stars. The smell got worse the deeper we went. Not steadily, in pockets. We'd walk 10 yards with just the normal wet leaf funk, then hit a wave so strong it made my eyes water. Drainage, Benson said again, like saying it enough times would make it true. We were maybe half a mile in when Martinez stopped. Here, he said quietly, pointing his rake at a spot off the trail. From the path, it just looked like more leaves and branches, but when I stepped closer with my headlamp, I saw the shallow depression. The way the leaves were piled there was wrong, too intentional. The mound had clean edges. Somebody had shaped it. The smell was worse there, heavy enough to taste. Jesus, Kid gagged. Maybe we should call somebody. Orders said bag everything organic, Benson snapped. He wasn't looking at any of us. Grab the shovels. We only brought rakes, I said. Benson didn't answer. He just plunged his rake into the pile and pulled. The first thing I saw was fabric. Not a shirt, exactly. Gray, shredded, soaked dark. The rake caught and tore it open, and something slid free like wet clay. I didn't process what I was looking at until the headlamp beam hit a curve of white. People think the worst part was when we found the teeth. It wasn't. The worst part was the sound that came out of Martinez. This thin, high whine, like air from a balloon you don't mean to let go of. A sound that said he had seen this before. There, in the rake-scraped leaves, were teeth. Not scattered like an animal's, in a line, still set in the pinkish ridge of a jaw. I dropped my bag. "We're calling this in," I said. My voice sounded weirdly far away, like the words were coming out of someone else. Benson's jaw clenched. For a second, I thought he was going to argue. Then he stepped back and scrubbed his face with his gloved hand. "Fine," he muttered. "Radio." The supervisor's voice crackled over the truck radio a few minutes later, tinny and annoyed. "You sure it's human?" he asked. "You guys ain't medical examiners." "Come smell it," I snapped. My hands were shaking. Silence on the line. Then, "Stay put. I'm calling it in." We waited on the trail, headlamps off, breaths puffing white in the dark. Nobody spoke. Somewhere far off, the highway hummed, oblivious. When the cops finally showed up, it was 2 patrol cars and 1 detective in a long coat who kept checking his watch. They pushed around the leaves with gloved hands, shining brighter lights than ours. Someone muttered, "Possible remains," into a radio. Crime scene tape went up in loose loops between the trees. We gave statements leaning against the truck, the smell still clinging to our clothes. I thought that was it, that we'd stumbled onto some horrible thing, and now adults with badges would take over, and we'd go back to bagging normal leaves on normal streets. I was wrong. 2 nights later, the supervisor called another meeting before shift. "Good news," he said without looking at us. "County took over that situation. Not our jurisdiction anymore. We got a commendation from the city for quick reporting." He held up a paper like a teacher showing off a gold star. His hand was shaking just enough to notice. Kid raised his hand. "So we're done going out there?" The supervisor licked his lips. "There's still a lot of debris on the trail," he said. "Other parts. Parks and Rec is on my ass. County only taped off a small section. We're cleared to resume collection as long as we avoid the marked area." "You want us back in those woods?" I asked. "After we found a jawbone?" "It's not a jawbone until forensics says so," he snapped. Then, softer. "Look, you guys want the hours, right? We're short this season. Bag everything organic. Stay away from the tape. That's the job." Martinez quit on the spot. Just took off his gloves, set them on the table, and walked out without a word. I stayed. I tell myself it was the money, that I didn't have a choice. But that's not exactly true. I stayed because a part of me wanted to know how long this had been going on. How many piles we'd already bagged without realizing. We went back to the North Woods Trail 2 more times that week. No cops, no detectives. Just us and the smell. It wasn't just one spot. That was the part nobody ever put in the report, because nobody ever filed it. We found other mounds. Shallower or older, where the smell had mostly thinned out, and the organic matter had gone soft and unrecognizable. We bagged it. Everything organic, right? That was the rule. The second time I saw bone, it wasn't a jaw. It was a long, curved shape I told myself might be part of a deer leg. I told myself that so hard my chest hurt. I didn't say anything. Neither did Benson. By then, Kid had started showing up drunk. His hands shook worse than mine. The supervisor kept signing his timesheets. A week later, I went by the trail on my day off. Crime scene tape was gone. No news article had ever appeared. I checked every day. Refresh, refresh. Nothing about remains found in city woods. Nothing about ongoing investigations. What I did find, months later, buried in the local briefs section, was a 2-sentence note about an ongoing inquiry into missing transients along the river. No mention of bones, no mention of us. I worked the rest of that season, kept my head down, collected my paycheck, bagged everything organic. The night I finally quit wasn't dramatic either. We were on a regular street, not even near the woods. Kids' toys left out in yards, porch lights on timers. I was raking a big damp pile under a maple, headphones in, trying not to think about anything, when my rake snagged on something. It was just a broken branch, that's all. A pale curve of wood, smooth where the bark had peeled away. But for a second, the way my headlamp hit it, my body flinched like it was bone. I looked up and realized the whole street was lined with mounds, not of dirt, of leaves. Every house, every curb, little soft hills of things people didn't want to see anymore. Bag it. Make it disappear. Let someone else deal with what's underneath. I walked back to the truck, took off my safety vest, and handed it to Benson. "I'm done," I said. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, like he'd been waiting. It's been 2 years. November has a different smell for me now. People think it's about pumpkin spice or fireplaces or wet pavement. For me, it's the thick, sweet reek that lives in the space between what we see and what we decide to bag and forget. Sometimes, driving past the North Woods Trail, I see new piles of leaves along the edges, raked neatly by volunteers or city crews. Kids race through them, laughing, kicking up clouds of brown and gold. Their parents stand on the path, hands in their pockets, watching. They don't know what used to be under there. Or maybe they do. Someone wrote those orders, after all. Someone decided to tell us to bag everything organic and not ask questions. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not the teeth, not the jaw, not even the smell. It's how easy it was to turn horror into just another line item on a work order. The kid at the end of the street had the kind of routine you only notice when your own life has slowed down enough to be quiet. My life slowed down when my girlfriend moved out and took half the furniture with her. Suddenly the house echoed. There was nothing to distract me from the fact that I was 31, alone in a starter home meant for the next stage, and spending my evenings in a folding camp chair in the living room because I hadn't replaced the couch yet. That's how I noticed him. Every night after dinner, around 7:45, he'd appear at the corner by the dead-end sign. Same red gloves, even when it wasn't that cold yet. Same navy coat with the sleeves a little too short. He couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. He'd stand there a second, looking both ways down a street that barely had traffic, then hurry to the strip of trees that separated our subdivision from the drainage ditch. He always went to the same spot. At first, I thought he was just playing. I remembered being that age, sneaking out of my parents' house to dig holes in the vacant lot, convinced I was making forts no one else could see. But he never seemed to play. He'd kneel, brush away leaves like he knew exactly where something was, and start digging with his hands. Every time, he had something with him. A small bundle, held carefully in both arms, wrapped in a dark cloth or plastic. Sometimes, when the porch lights lined up right, I'd see silver flashes of duct tape. He'd lower it into the hole, cover it like he was tucking it in, then smooth the leaves back into place until the ground looked untouched. Then he'd go home. Same route, same red gloves swinging at his sides. It went on like that for a week before I told myself I was imagining things. My brain wasn't exactly a reliable narrator at that point. Empty house, too much time, November creeping in with its early dark and long shadows. You start noticing patterns where none exist, just so your day has a shape. But once you see something enough times, pretending you didn't gets harder. On the 8th night, I turned off my porch light and watched from the dark. There he was, 7:45 on the dot. Red gloves. Small bundle. The only difference was the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, like he could feel my eyes on him even though I was behind glass. He dug faster that night. His little shoulders shook with effort. When he lowered the bundle into the hole, I saw the shape of it better. It was longer than I'd thought. Not round, like a ball, or a box, narrow, with a slight bend. When he disappeared back down the street, I realized I'd been holding my breath. I told myself he was burying toys. Maybe his parents made him get rid of stuff, and this was his way of holding on. Kids are weirdly ceremonial about their objects. That made sense. That was normal. But the next night, he did it again. Same spot. By the third week, the ground there should have looked disturbed. I knew enough about dirt to know you can't dig and redig without the earth keeping score. But from the sidewalk, the leaves looked undisturbed. No mounds, no bare patches, just a rust-colored carpet. If you hadn't been watching every night, you'd never know. That bothered me more than any of it. One Tuesday, I stayed late at work just so I wouldn't be home to see. When I pulled into my driveway at 9, I caught a flash of red at the corner of the street. He was late. Or I was early. He froze when my headlights swept past him, like a deer. For a second, our eyes met. His were wide and flat, like he was already bracing for me to yell. I didn't. I just lifted a hand in a vague wave. He turned and ran toward the trees. I sat in my parked car long after the engine shut off, keys still in the ignition. People think the worst part was what I found that night. It wasn't. The worst part was the way I sat there trying to decide if I was going to be the kind of adult who pretended not to see. In the end, I followed him. Not right away. I went inside, dropped my bag, pretended to check my phone. I told myself I was just going for a walk to clear my head. Healthy habits, fresh air. I left my porch light off. By the time I reached the dead-end sign, he was already on his knees in the leaves, digging. The red gloves flashed in quick, frantic movements. "Hey!" I called softly. He jerked, whirled around, and almost fell backward. For a second, I thought he might bolt. But his eyes flicked past me to the row of houses, all their windows glowing blue from TVs, and he stayed. "I'm not mad," I said quickly. Are you okay out here?" "I'm fine," he said. His voice had that forced toughness some kids learn too early. "What are you doing?" He hesitated. "Nothing." Behind him, the bundle lay on the ground, wrapped tight in duct tape. It was about the length of my forearm, maybe a little shorter. The tape made rippled patterns where it had been wrapped over itself in layers. I took a step closer. He stepped in front of it, shoulders up. "You should go home," he said. "It's not for you." Those words chilled me more than if he'd said anything about ghosts or monsters. It's not for you. Like whatever he was doing belonged to someone else, someone bigger. "What's your name?" I asked. He swallowed. "Eli." "Okay, Eli. My name's Mark. I live 3 houses down." I pointed. "Your parents okay with you being out here this late?" His jaw clenched at the word parents. "My dad knows," he said. The way he said it made it sound less like permission and more like an assignment. "Does he ask you to do this?" Eli stared at me, then at the houses again. Most of our neighbors were inside, cocooned in their own little worlds of dinner and TV and dishes. No one was looking out the window. "He said if I didn't, he'd know," Eli whispered. "He always knows." The wind kicked up then, sending a scatter of leaves across my shoes. Underneath the smell of cold dirt, I caught something else, something sour and faintly metallic, from the duct-taped bundle. "Eli," I said quietly. "What is that?" He blinked hard. His nose was running. He wiped it on his sleeve. "I don't look," he said. "I just bury it. He said it's better if I don't look." Something moved inside the tape. Not a big movement, just a twitch, a little flex along the surface like muscle under skin. My stomach dropped. "Okay," I said. I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was slamming against my ribs. "Eli, I need you to step back for a second, okay?" He shook his head violently. "No, I have to do it. He'll be mad. He'll know." The bundle jerked again. This time there was a sound too. A muffled, frantic scrabble like nails on cardboard under layers of tape. I heard myself before I felt myself moving. "Back. Now." I must have sounded like his dad, because Eli flinched and stumbled to the side. I crouched and put my hands on the bundle. It was warm. Whatever was inside thrashed when I touched it, a small, trapped panic that vibrated up my arms. The tape made little crackling noises as it strained. I didn't think. I just started peeling. Duct tape is hard enough to get off when you're calm and dry. With cold fingers and adrenaline shake, it felt impossible. My nails bent backward. My fingers slipped. Whoever wrapped it had gone over the same spots again and again, making a gray shell. Eli started crying. "Please," he whispered. "Please, you're gonna get me in trouble. You don't understand." He said it like I was ruining something, like I was the one bringing danger here. A tear in the tape finally gave way. I dug my fingers into it and ripped, the adhesive burning my skin. The smell hit me first. Hot, enclosed fear and urine and something coppery. My brain tried to label it and gave up. Then I saw fur. Not much. Just a patch of matted brown, darkened with sweat. A small, shivering body twisted toward the light, eyes wild and rolling. It was a dog. Or had been before someone did this to it. Tiny, maybe 10 pounds. Muzzle taped shut separately. Paws bound. It looked half crushed. Eli sobbed louder. "He makes me," he choked. "He says it's practice, so I'll be ready when it's not animals." My vision tunneled. "What do you mean when it's not animals?" I heard myself ask, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Eli clamped his mouth shut. We stared at each other over the shaking, half-taped dog. That's where the story should pivot, right? That's where a responsible adult would scoop up the animal, call 911, march down the street, and end whatever this was in one clean act of moral clarity. I wish I could tell you that's what happened. I did call. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone, but I called. Animal control. Then the non-emergency police line. I told them there was a kid, an injured dog, possible abuse. They said they'd send someone. "Do I have to go home?" Eli whispered. "If I don't finish." "You're not going back there," I said. "Not tonight." We sat together in the dark, me stroking the dog's damp fur, Eli picking at the red rubber of his gloves until little curls broke off. The dog's breathing was ragged but there. It pressed itself into my lap like I was a piece of floating wood in a flood. The officers who showed up were tired looking. They took our statements, glanced toward Eli's house. Long drives do something weird to your sense of time. You start measuring your life in mile markers and bathroom breaks instead of hours and days. The world shrinks to the dashboard glow, the glare of oncoming headlights, and the slow, unrolling ribbon of road. I was 6 hours into a 10-hour drive the first time I saw the note. It was the second week of November, the time of year when the sun seems to give up around 4:30. I'd left after work, convinced I could beat the traffic. Instead, I ended up in the dark, halfway between nowhere and nowhere else, watching my GPS estimate creep up. I pulled into the gas station because the sign said, "Clean restrooms," and because my eyes were starting to blur at the edges. From the outside, it was one of those sad, aging stations that looks like it remembers when cigarettes were still advertised as sexy. Flickering fluorescent lights, faded beer posters, a handwritten, "No public restrooms, customers only" sign on the door. I bought a bottle of water I didn't want, so I could ask for the bathroom key without guilt. The clerk was a guy in his 20s who looked like he'd been tired for a decade. He wordlessly handed me a grimy key attached to a chunk of wood the size of a paperback book. "Outside, around back," he said. That should have been my first hint. Any bathroom you access from the outside of a building is already a horror story waiting to happen. The air back there smelled like old oil and something damp. The restroom door had that chipped beige paint all public facilities seem to share. The universal color of "we gave up." The key stuck halfway in the lock. I had to jiggle it hard. The lights flickered on with a pop. There was one sink, one urinal, one stall. The mirror over the sink was warped in the middle so your face bent inward, funhouse style. Someone had carved initials into the metal of the paper towel dispenser. and taped to the corner of the mirror, slightly crooked, was a white index card with 4 words in neat blue pen. "He's in the stall." I stared at it, bladder suddenly forgotten. I don't know how long I stood there, hand still on the key, brain struggling to sort this into a category. Prank. It had to be a prank. Some bored teenager with a Sharpie and a sense of humor. The card didn't look old. The edges weren't yellowed, the ink wasn't faded. But that doesn't mean anything. Could have been there a week, replaced whenever the clerk cleaned. Except, nothing else in that bathroom looked like anyone had cleaned anything in a while. I glanced at the stall. The door was closed. Of course it was closed. That's what stall doors do when no one is in them. But suddenly the closedness felt intentional, heavy. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Urban legends, chain emails about serial killers hiding under cars, all that. My rational brain knew that a note in a gas station bathroom was not a reliable source of imminent danger. My rational brain did not have to walk the few steps to the stall. "Hello," I called. No answer. "Anyone in there?" For a second, there was nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of breathing, not heavy, not dramatic, just the quiet, irregular exhale of someone trying not to make noise. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I can't explain why that was the moment I believed the note. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the way the breathing changed when I spoke. As if whoever was in there tightened up, realizing they'd been heard. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't mean to, intrude. Just need to use the restroom." Silence. Then the tiniest scrape, like a shoe shifting on tile. My fight-or-flight response had gone straight to freeze, which is the one they never show in movies. I stood there, muscles locked, every cell screaming at me to move, and none of them taking the lead. The note watched me from the mirror. "He's in the stall." What does that even mean? The stall is exactly where people are supposed to be in a bathroom. The phrasing implied something wrong with him being there, not "someone's in the stall," not occupied. "He's in the stall," capital H implied. "I'm gonna get the clerk," I blurted, "in case you're stuck or something." As soon as I stepped outside, my body remembered it existed. My hands shook so hard the key rattled against the wood block as I locked the door. The clerk looked up when I came in. "There's somebody in the bathroom," I said. I heard how lame that sounded. "In the stall. And there's this note." "Oh, that," he said, exhaling like he'd been waiting for this. "Yeah." "Yeah?" I repeated. "What does 'yeah' mean?" He rubbed his forehead. "Hang on." He went to the back, disappearing behind a rack of windshield wiper fluid, and came out with another guy in a polo shirt with the gas station logo and a name tag that said, "Manager." "What's the issue?" the manager asked. His tone said he already regretted asking. "There's a note in the bathroom mirror that says, 'He's in the stall,'" I said. "And someone is in the stall. They're not responding." The manager's jaw tightened almost unnoticeably. The clerk looked at the floor. "Did he threaten you?" the manager asked. "No, he just breathed." I heard how insane that sounded the second it left my mouth. The manager sighed. "Probably some homeless guy. They like to crash in there. We've called the cops before. They don't do much." "Did they leave the note?" I asked. He glanced at the clerk, who avoided his eyes. "That note's been there a while," the manager said. "I keep telling him to take it down." "I did," the clerk muttered. "They keep putting it back." "They who?" I asked. Neither of them answered. "Look," the manager said, pasting on a customer service half-smile. "We'll check it out. You want your money back for the water?" "That's not—" "No," I said. I think there's something wrong in there." He nodded like he was humoring me. By the time the police came, whoever had been in the stall was gone. That part still doesn't make sense when I run it back. I had locked the door behind me. I was sure of it. But when the clerk shuffled out back with the officers and opened it, the stall door was wide open, swinging slightly, the tiny metal latch wobbling. No feet visible under the divider. No one behind the door. Just a standard, grimy bathroom stall with an empty toilet. They did a cursory search anyway, opening the ceiling panel, checking behind the trash can. One officer laughed when he saw the note. "Spooky," he said. "You guys trying to drum up Halloween business late?" The other officer shrugged. "We had a transient barricade himself in there last month," he said to his partner. "Scratched up the walls pretty good. Maybe that's what this is about." They left with a warning about not wasting resources. I drove away feeling like an idiot. I told myself I'd just walked into some local drama I didn't understand. Maybe the note was an inside joke among the staff. Maybe some kid wrote it after a bad experience. Gas stations collect weirdness. That's their job. 2 weeks later, I had to take the same route home. I didn't plan to stop at the same station. In fact, I consciously planned not to. But my gas gauge dipped lower than I expected, and the next few exits looked even sketchier. So I found myself pulling into the same cracked parking lot, under the same flickering lights, in the deep blue early dark of another November evening. Inside, the same clerk was there. He didn't seem to recognize me. I didn't have to pee that badly. I could have just bought gas and kept going. But the memory of that breathing had taken on a life of its own in my head over the past 2 weeks, stretching and magnifying until it felt like an unfinished sentence. I took the key. The bathroom light flickered on, buzzing. The note was still there. Same angle, same blue ink, same 4 words. The tape at the corners was curling a little, but otherwise it looked untouched. My pulse picked up. The stall door was closed again. "Hello?" I called, voice cracking. Silence. I took a step closer, forcing my brain to behave like something besides static. I knocked on the stall door with my knuckles. "Anyone in there?" Nothing. The toilet flushed. I jumped back so hard I hit the sink. It was automatic, I realized half a second later. Motion sensor. My knocking must have set it off. I laughed once, a short, sharp sound that didn't feel like mine. Then I saw the scratches. On the inside of the stall door, right where the latch sat, the metal was gouged. Long, ragged marks running vertically and diagonally, starting thick near the lock and tapering down like whatever made them had gotten weaker over time. I opened the door with fingers that didn't feel attached to my body. The hinges squealed. The inside panel was worse, deep grooves in the cheap paint. Some clustered around the latch, some raked down the center, all at about the height of a seated person's hands. I touched one. It fit my fingernail perfectly. People think the worst part was imagining someone trapped in there, clawing at the door until their fingers bled. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing how old the marks looked, how many coats of half-hearted touch-up paint they'd bled through. This hadn't happened last month. This hadn't even happened this year. This had been happening a long time. There was a faint reddish-brown residue in the deeper grooves. Old, flaked, scrubbed at, and painted over. I backed out of the stall and stared at the note. "He's in the stall." Suddenly, it didn't feel like a warning about a present danger. It felt like a label, like someone trying, in the simplest language they had, to mark the spot where something terrible kept happening. I went back inside and asked the clerk how long the note had been there. He shrugged. "Since before me," he said. "Nobody remembers who wrote it. It just is. Why don't you take it down?" He glanced at the security camera in the corner, then leaned closer. "Because every time we do, something happens," he whispered. "Last time, that guy locked himself in there and we had to call the fire department to get him out. Time before that, a girl said some dude crawled under the stall divider while she was in there. Before that, some kid went missing for like 2 hours. They found him sitting on the toilet, door unlocked, just staring." He swallowed. "The manager thinks we're superstitious," he said. "But since the note's been up, nobody's gotten actually hurt. Not here, anyway." "Not here?" I echoed. He looked at the floor. "Guy who barricaded himself in? He died a week later. Overdose behind the old strip mall. The girl? Boyfriend beat her up. The kid's mom got in a wreck. It's like..." He shook his head. "I don't know. I don't like thinking about it. None of that was supernatural. None of it required ghosts. People overdosed, domestic violence happened, car accidents happened. But I couldn't shake the pattern he was constructing in his head. Like the bathroom stall wasn't the place bad things happened, but the place they paused on their way through someone's life. I called the non-emergency police line again that night, from my car in the parking lot. I told them about the scratches, the note, the breathing. I said I was worried that the gas station was being used to hold people, even briefly. I asked if they had reports on file. "We've responded to a few calls there," the woman on the phone said. "No ongoing criminal investigations. If you didn't witness a crime and no one is in immediate danger, there's not much we can do." "What about the scratches?" I insisted. "You're just going to leave them?" She sighed. "Sir, if we started investigating every scratch in every bathroom stall, we'd need a whole new department." I hung up feeling stupid and furious and helpless all at once. I've been back 3 more times since then. Long drives, late nights, bladder and curiosity conspiring.
The year before the container showed up, I spent Thanksgiving eating instant mashed potatoes over the sink. It wasn't as sad as it sounds. Or maybe it was. I'd just moved to a new city for a job that sounded impressive in my LinkedIn headline, and felt small and pointless in real life. My family was 3 states away. Flights were expensive. I told myself I didn't mind being alone. I used to think loneliness was loud, some dramatic ache, like in movies. It isn't. It's quiet. It's realizing no one would know if you choked on your food, because no one's expecting you to text them back. By the next November, I'd gotten used to the quiet. I worked at a financial services call center. Client Relations Specialist was the official title, which meant I listened to angry people yell about fees for 8 hours a day. My co-workers were nice, but everyone scattered to their actual lives at 5. I went home to my 1-bedroom apartment with the thin walls and the humming fridge and the habit of checking my phone just to confirm there were no new messages. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I did a grocery run. Turkey lunch meat, boxed stuffing, a small can of cranberry sauce, 1 slice of pumpkin pie from the store bakery in its own triangle container. "Solo feast," I said out loud to no one, dropping it all on the counter. The night before the holiday, I worked late. The office felt hollowed out. Half the cubicles were empty. The usual background chatter had thinned. I stayed on until almost 9, not because they needed me, but because going home just to sit with the TV felt heavier than staying. When I finally pulled into the apartment lot, the building looked like a row of lit-up dioramas. Other people's lives staged behind their windows. A group of friends laughing around a table, a couple arguing in gestures, someone decorating a fake fireplace with paper leaves. My unit was dark. I let myself in, toed off my shoes, and went straight to the fridge to grab a beer. That's when I saw it. On the middle shelf, between the jar of pickles and my half-empty carton of eggs, sat a clear plastic container with a blue lid. Not mine. I didn't own any Tupperware like that. Mine were all mismatched deli containers and take-out soup tubs. This one was tidy. Inside I could see neat sections of food. Sliced turkey, pale and moist. A scoop of mashed potatoes with a swirl on top, like it had been portioned with an ice cream scoop. A rectangle of stuffing. A small plastic ramekin of bright red cranberry sauce. And in one corner, a perfectly cut triangle of pumpkin pie, crust uncracked. My first thought was that I was losing my mind. I opened the fridge wider and stared, waiting for some memory to click into place. But I knew I hadn't left work for lunch. I knew I hadn't gone anywhere but the office and the grocery store. And the store pie slice I'd bought was still in its own container on the bottom shelf, untouched. There was a note taped to the lid. Same time next year. Black ink, careful handwriting, the kind of loops that suggest someone who pays attention to their signatures. My scalp prickled. I live alone. I changed the locks when I moved in. I didn't give out spare keys. Maintenance had been by once months earlier to fix a leaky faucet. That was it. My rational brain went to the least terrifying explanation it could find. Mix-up. The super had been making rounds. Someone had asked him to store leftovers in a fridge. He'd accidentally put it in the wrong unit. It was flimsy, but it was something. I checked the door. Still locked. The chain was on. I took the container out carefully, half expecting something to jump out at me. It was cold to the touch, condensation beading along the lid. The food looked fresh, not like restaurant leftovers, but like something plated at home and then transferred. There was no restaurant branding, no foil, just that note. Same time next year. I didn't call the police. People always ask why I didn't, like it's obvious. But what would I have said? Hi, someone put a perfectly normal meal in my fridge and wrote a slightly weird note about next year. No, they didn't threaten me. No, nothing is stolen. Yes, I can lock my door. No, I don't have any proof. Instead, I called the building manager. He came up in sweatpants and a t-shirt, keys jingling. Got your message, he said. Something about food. I showed him the container. He frowned. We don't do any kind of community meal thing, if that's what you're thinking. Liability. Is it from a neighbour? You're the only one with a master key, I said. Did you let anyone in here while I was gone? He held up his hands. No way. We only enter for maintenance, and that's with notice. You got the last notice we sent, right? He was right. There hadn't been any. Maybe you forgot you had it, he offered weakly. I pulled out my phone and showed him my grocery transaction from an hour earlier. Turkey lunch, meat, boxed stuffing, canned cranberry. If I already had this, I said, why would I buy this? He stared at the note. Probably a prank, he said finally. Kids in the building get bored. Maybe one of them swiped something from home and thought it'd be funny to freak out the lady in 3B. Kids don't have master keys, I snapped. He flinched. Look, I can change your lock tomorrow if it'll make you feel better. There's not really anything else I can do. He left the container on my counter, like it was no more significant than a forgotten Tupperware at an office potluck. I didn't sleep much that night. I threw the food away. It felt rude, in a way I can't explain, like rejecting a gift, but the idea of putting any of it in my mouth made me nauseous. I double-checked the windows. I set a chair under the front doorknob, like I was in a cheap motel. Every creak sounded like footsteps. The next morning, the container was gone from the trash. I only noticed because I was staring into the bin, debating taking it back out to inspect it more like some sort of deranged detective. I'd piled coffee grounds and eggshells on top. Now the food scraps and filters were still there, but the blue-lidded container was not. I hadn't taken it out. I would have remembered. People think the worst part was the food in my fridge. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing that someone had been in my apartment twice, and the only evidence they wanted me to have was, I see you. I know you're alone. I know the calendar. I called in sick to work. Then I called the non-emergency police number. The officer who came by was polite in that slightly exhausted way you get when your job is listening to people's worst days. So, someone entered your apartment, left a meal, and removed the container from your garbage, he summarized. Yes. Any sign of forced entry? No, but the building manager has a master key. He jotted that down. Anything else missing? Anything moved? That was the thing. Nothing else was disturbed. My laptop was where I'd left it. My underwear drawer looked the same. The little layer of dust on my bookshelf remained unbroken. It was like the only mission had been the container. "We'll have a talk with your building manager," the officer said. "But without forced entry or property damage, it's hard to pursue much. If you notice anything else, call us." "Can you dust for prints?" I asked. He looked around at my modest, slightly messy apartment. "On the Tupperware you threw away? That's now also missing?" "Right," he left. I went to Home Depot and bought secondary locks, a sliding bar for the door, rubber wedges for the windows. I ordered a cheap camera that pointed at my front door and sent clips to my phone. Thanksgiving came and went. I ate my solo feast in front of a friend's rerun and pretended I wasn't listening for the sound of my own door opening. Nothing else happened that year. By January, it was a story I could tell at happy hour, if I framed it right. The mystery leftovers incident. People laughed. "At least they have good taste," someone said. "Mashed potatoes are my love language." I laughed too. That was easier than admitting that every time I opened my fridge, I half expected to see that blue lid. The camera never captured anything unusual. Just my comings and goings. The building manager delivering a new smoke detector. An Amazon guy dropping off a package. Life went on. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined some of it. Maybe I had bought the meal and forgotten. But the note? Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe I'd thrown the container in the dumpster and forgotten that too. Brains can lie. I work in an industry built on people misremembering their transactions. Then November came around again. By then, I'd been promoted. I had more responsibility, marginally more pay, and a few friendly acquaintances I sometimes got lunch with. I'd also started seeing a therapist who listened very carefully when I told her about the leftovers and my fear they'd come back. "What would it mean if they did?" she asked. "That I'm not crazy," I said, "and that someone out there is very patient." The morning before Thanksgiving, I woke up early, jittery and wired like I had an exam. I checked the camera feed first thing, just a blurry clip of me coming home the night before. I worked from home that day. Our office was open, but barely. Most people had taken PTO. My boss said I could log in remotely and monitor the queue. Every hour on the hour, I walked to the fridge and opened it. Nothing. Around 6 p.m, it finally happened. I'd gone to the bathroom. That's it. I was gone maybe 3 minutes. When I came back to the kitchen, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Front door. I froze. The clip had already uploaded. I tapped it with numb fingers. The video showed my door. The timestamp said 6:02 p.m. For 3 full seconds, nothing moved. Then the handle turned. Slow, deliberate. The door opened just wide enough for a hand and forearm to slip through. The angle cut off the rest of the person. No face, no body, just that arm. They were wearing a dark jacket. Their hand was bare. They reached in, staying out of camera range, and did something near the floor, just off screen. Then, just as calmly, they closed the door again. The whole thing took less than 8 seconds. I replayed it over and over, hoping for some identifying mark. A tattoo? A scar? There was nothing. Not even a ring. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it filled the room. I turned around. The fridge was humming gently. Closed. I walked toward it like people walk toward caskets. Middle shelf. Between the pickles and the eggs. The same container. The same blue lid. The same 4 neat compartments. Turkey, potatoes, stuffing, cranberry, pie. Same note taped on top. Same time next year. Only this time, there was a second line. You didn't eat last year. People think that's when I lost it. It wasn't. I think I went very calm. Everything in my head went quiet. I picked up the container, carried it to the sink, and peeled the lid off. The smell that came out was normal, not rotten, not drugged, just food, warm even, like it hadn't had time to cool completely. I stared at it for a long time. Then I did what I probably should have done the first time. I called 911. The officers came faster this time, 2 of them. They watched the video. They inspected the door. The lock was still intact. The frame was unmarked. Who else has keys? One asked. Just the manager, I said. I had them changed after last year. So the manager also has your new keys, the other pointed out. They went downstairs to talk to him. When they came back, their faces were neutral and unhelpful. Your manager says he hasn't entered your unit except for the smoke detector in March, they said. He denies any involvement with the food. Of course he does, I said. But you believe him? We believe we don't have probable cause to accuse him of anything, the older officer said. He's offered to let us see his master keys, verify they're all accounted for. We will. What about the video? I demanded. What about the fact that whoever this is wrote same time next year twice, and then actually did it? That's premeditated. They exchanged a look. We can file a report, the younger one said. We can advise your manager to review building security. But technically, the only law clearly being broken here is trespassing. Is the note not threatening? I asked. Is the phrase, same time next year, not ominous to you? It's unnerving, he admitted. But they're not saying what happens next year. They're bringing you food. He said it like that nullified any possible danger, as if goodwill containers couldn't carry anything but kindness. Get a deadbolt, the older cop advised on his way out. And maybe one of those metal bars for sliding doors. These pre-war frames are flimsy. I added more locks. I gave a copy of the video to 2 friends and my therapist. I emailed it to myself with the subject line, if anything happens to me, start here. Then I waited for something else to happen. Nothing did. Thanksgiving passed. December came with its undercooked cheer. At work, someone started a leftovers club, where people brought in extra food from home. I did not participate. It's been 4 years now. 4 Thanksgivings. 4 containers. Year 3, the note said, better. Year 4, there you go. Because I ate it. That's the part I don't like admitting. But when someone proves they can get into your home whenever they want, and the only thing they ask of you is this small, ritualized act, your mind starts to bend. The 3rd year, I threw it away again. The container vanished from my trash again. Nothing else was touched. The anxiety afterward was worse than the first time, like a punishment that never landed. The 4th year when I lifted the lid, I saw something new. A single sprig of parsley on the mashed potatoes. An absurd, restaurant-like garnish that almost made me laugh. I took one bite. It tasted like my grandmother's cooking. Not exactly, but close enough. The right balance of salt and cream. The texture that comes from someone who mashes by hand, not with a mixer. I cried, alone in my kitchen, spoon in my mouth. Now November means 2 things to me. It still means early dark and sweaters and people talking about flights and family drama. But it also means the countdown to the day someone who knows my schedule, my address, my habits, and my loneliness will slide a key into my lock and leave me a portioned reminder that I am seen. I've changed apartments. I've changed buildings. I've changed cities. The containers always find the new fridge. Same time next year. No one has ever asked if I want this. That's what makes it horror, not kindness. Not the food itself, not the note, not even the intrusion. It's the way someone decided they know what I need. A ritual, a meal, a sense of being anticipated, and they're willing to violate every boundary I have, year after year, to prove it. If you're thinking, maybe it's someone who cares, someone you knew, that's the worst possibility of all, because if it's a stranger, at least it's just obsession. If it's someone who loved me once, then love is just another word for ownership, and November is when I'm reminded that I'm still on their calendar. My office window looks out over a city bench that doesn't exist on any map. It's technically there, of course. A concrete slab with a metal back bolted into the sidewalk across from the building. There's probably a line item for it in some municipal budget, but no one notices it unless they need somewhere to wait for a bus that never comes. I didn't notice it for the first 3 years I worked there. 9 to 5 in a commercial insurance claims office will do that to you. Your world shrinks to your monitor, your task list, the rotation of coffee mugs at your desk. The outside is just something that happens behind thick glass. Then November 1st came, and a man sat down. He arrived around 10:15. I only know because I'd just finished my second cup of coffee and checked the time in that automatic, pointless way. When I looked up, he was there. Mid-50s, maybe older. Thick grey coat, dark beanie, hands folded on a messenger bag in his lap. Perfectly still, like he'd been placed. He looked straight ahead, not up at the building, not down at his phone. Just waited. I watched him for a minute, then went back to my claim. By 11:30, he was still there. By lunch, he was still there. Around 3 p.m, my co-worker Leah rolled her chair over and nodded toward the window. New art installation? She joked. I shrugged. Guess so. We did what you do in offices, made up stories to entertain ourselves. Maybe he was waiting for a date who ghosted him. Maybe he was a street philosopher. Maybe he liked the particular angle of sun on that exact spot. At 5:03 p.m, something changed. I was shutting down my computer, thinking about what sad takeout I'd pick up on my way home, when I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. The man on the bench lifted his head and looked up at our window. Not the building in general, our window. 5th floor, 3rd from the left. Where I sat, our eyes met through the glass. It was like being caught doing something you didn't know was wrong. He held my gaze for a fraction of a second. No expression, no smile, no wave. Then stood, adjusted his bag, and walked away. That was weird, I said out loud. What? Leah asked, putting on her coat. He looked up. She glanced at the empty bench. Well, he's gone now. Mystery solved. The next day he came back. Same time, around 10:15. Same bench, same posture. By day 3 it stopped being a quirk and started being a pattern. He never brought food. He never checked his phone. Once in a while he'd shift his legs, but that was the extent of his movement. It was like he'd turned waiting into a job. At 5:03 every day, he'd look up at my window, make eye contact, then leave. I tried to ignore it. I told myself he was looking at the building in general. Maybe there was a reflection I couldn't see, some trick of light. I told myself it was coincidence. But if you spend 8 hours a day on the 5th floor of a cubicle farm, you start living for anything that breaks the monotony. My routine became process claims, respond to emails, check the bench. On November 7th, I broke. What are you doing? Leah asked as I stood up and started putting on my coat at 1 p.m. Going out for lunch, I said. You brought lunch. I need air. I took the elevator down, my heart beating faster than it had any right to. When I pushed through the revolving door, the cold hit me like a wall. November had finally decided to act like itself. The man looked smaller from the sidewalk, less imposing. He had lines around his mouth that could have been from smiling once, a long time ago. Up close, the coat looked older. Not homeless old, but worn. I walked toward the bench. "Hi," I said. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the building across the street, my building. From this angle, I could see that our 5th floor windows reflected the grey sky. "Do you, need anything?" I asked. "Are you waiting for someone?" "Nothing." "I work up there," I added, pointing. 5th floor. That got a response in the most minimal way possible. One of his fingers twitched on the strap of his bag. "I see you out here every day," I said. "Do you?" "Not yet," he murmured. His voice was soft, but the words were unmistakable. "Not yet what?" I asked. He swallowed. "Not yet." Then he turned his head away, like he'd already said more than he meant to. There are moments when you should listen to the animal part of your brain, the part that reads body language and tone and says, "This is not for you." I ignored it. "Do you have somewhere to go at night?" I asked. "Is there someone I can call?" He laughed once, the sound short and rusty. "I'm not your problem," he said. "You're mine." The way he said it was matter of fact, like stating the weather. I went back inside. I told Leah what he'd said. She frowned. "That's creepy," she said. "You should tell security." Security was a retired cop named Don, who spent most of his day watching CCTV monitors and making sure no one microwaved fish in the break room. He listened, then looked at the feed. "Guy on the bench," he said. "Yeah, I've seen him. Not doing anything illegal. Public sidewalk." "He said I'm his problem," I said. "That could mean anything," Don replied. "We get regulars out there all the time. Street preachers, petitioners. As long as they're not blocking the door or harassing anyone on the property, my hands are kind of tied." "What about off the property?" I asked. He gave me a look I recognized from my own job, the look of someone who knows exactly where their responsibility ends. "If he follows you or tries to come in without a pass, come get me," he said. "Until then, maybe just pull the blinds if it bothers you." I didn't pull the blinds. That's on me. Part of me wanted to see where this story was going. We all like to think our lives are building towards something, not just more emails, more spreadsheets, more Tuesdays. On November 10th, he changed the script. 5:03 came. He looked up at the window. Our eyes met through the glass. This time, he mouthed a word. It took me a second to realize it was my name. Not hey, or you, or up there. My actual name, 2 syllables, clear as if he'd spoken them out loud. I flinched so hard my mouse hit the floor. "How did he know my name?" I asked Leah. She rolled her chair over to my side and peered out. "I mean, you wear a badge," she said. "And you sit in front of a giant pane of glass." He could have read it. "He's across the street," I said. "On the 5th floor, through a tinted window." She shrugged. "Binoculars? Zoom on his phone? Or maybe you're not the only one who talks loud on calls." That bothered me more than any supernatural explanation would have. I started cataloguing my own behaviour. How often I said my name when answering calls. Whether I'd mentioned it on the sidewalk. How loudly I laughed when someone sent a good meme to the team chat. That tension changed me. I found myself sitting up straighter, checking my reflection, putting on lipstick I didn't need, then scrubbing it off when I realised what I was doing. I hated that this stranger had become a mirror. On November 14th, I called the police. "He sits there all day," I said. "Every day. He told me I'm his problem. Now he looks up at me at exactly the same time and mouths my name." "Has he threatened you?" the operator asked. "Not directly." "Has he tried to follow you? Contacted you? Entered your building?" "No, but..." "It doesn't sound like a crime," she said gently. "We can send a patrol car to do a welfare check. But if he's just sitting on a public bench..." I hung up, feeling like I was the one being unreasonable. The patrol car came. I watched from the window as two officers approached him. One talked. The other stood slightly back, hand near his belt. The man nodded, answered. After a few minutes, they left. He stayed. An email went out from HR the next day. Subject, safety reminder. Personal boundaries. It was one of those bland corporate missives, reminding us not to engage with members of the public loitering near the building. If we felt unsafe, we were to contact security. There was no mention of the man on the bench, but everyone knew. "Your boyfriend caused a memo," Leah teased, trying to make light of it. "He's not my anything," I said. I started taking the back exit. There's an alley behind our building that connects to a side street. It smells like dumpsters and wet cardboard, but it lets you slip away without passing the bench. I used it every night, glancing over my shoulder like a character in a PSA. People think the worst part was him knowing my name. It wasn't. The worst part was how quickly everyone adjusted to him being there, like he was a new piece of furniture in the landscape. The man on the bench. Oh, him. By the third week, the receptionist barely glanced outside when he arrived. Don nodded at the monitor and then went back to his crossword. HR moved on to sending reminders about open enrollment. Only I seemed to be stuck on the fact that a stranger had appointed himself my watcher. On November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving, I screwed up. I stayed late. Most of the office had cleared out by 3. Flights to catch, family to drive to, pies to bake. I didn't have any of that. So I kept working. It felt better than going home to microwave dinner in a quiet apartment. By the time I shut down my computer, it was 6:15. The office lights were on motion sensors. Half the floor was dark. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the hallway. I almost convinced myself he'd given up. The bench would be empty, I told myself, the spell broken. I could laugh about it later. I walked to the window. He was still there. In the dark, he looked like part of the street. The streetlight near the bench cast his face in yellow. His coat was buttoned up to his throat. His messenger bag sat at his feet now, not in his lap, like he'd settled in. As I watched, he stood. Immediately, my stomach dropped. It was such a small movement, but it meant the pattern had changed. He didn't look up at the window. He looked at the building entrance, the front door, the one I usually took. I saw myself, briefly, from above, alone on the 5th floor, with the only person watching me being the one I was afraid of. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the back stairwell. The alley was colder than usual. The walls funneled the wind. It smelled like old grease and something metallic. Halfway down, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, unhurried, matching my speed. I told myself it was someone else from the building. A janitor, another late worker, someone who'd parked in the same side lot. I didn't turn around. At the end of the alley, the street opened up. There were a few cars, a dimly lit bus stop, a convenience store with a flickering sign. I cut right toward my usual parking garage. The footsteps turned too. "Excuse me," a voice said behind me. "Miss?" Something in the tone made me stop. It wasn't him. It was Don. "Jesus," I exhaled. "You scared me." "Sorry." He held up his hands. "Didn't mean to. Just saw you head out the alley and wanted to make sure you were okay." "You followed me?" "In a manner of speaking," he said. "Guy on the bench left as soon as you stood up. He started toward the main door. Figured you might take the back, so I took the shortcut." I stared at him. "You saw him?" I asked. "Yep." "Did he say anything?" "Nope," Don said. "That's what worries me. He walked me to my car that night. We didn't talk much. At the garage entrance, he paused. I pulled his record," he said. "You what?" "The cops who came by ran his name. Shared it with me, off the record. Habit, I guess. Old job." I looked him up. "And?" I asked. "He had a daughter," Don said. "About your age. She died 2 years ago. Hit and run. Driver never caught." A weird, hollow feeling opened up in my chest. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked. Don shrugged. "You work claims," he said. "How many auto cases you handle a week?" "Dozens." "And everyone is tied to a file number," he said. "A case, an adjuster, maybe a denial letter, maybe a settlement someone thought wasn't enough." It clicked slowly. "You think I denied something of his?" I asked. "A claim?" "Could be, or you're just a stand-in," Don said. "Someone in a suit behind glass, like the one who wrote, 'We regret to inform you.' Grief looks for a face, kid. If it can't find the right one, it'll take anyone that fits the outline." "Has he done this before?" I asked. Don hesitated. "He had a restraining order for sitting outside another office last year," he admitted. "Bank this time. He never went in. Just waited. Looked up. Walked away when they closed. They couldn't pin anything on him except making people nervous. They moved the problem. They didn't solve it." "Why doesn't anyone stop him?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Because he's not crossing any lines," Don said. "Not the ones that matter on paper, anyway." The next week he was back. Every day at 10:15. Every day until 5:03. Sometimes he mouthed my name. Sometimes he didn't. But he always looked up, like checking to make sure I was still there, still doing whatever job he'd assigned me in his private ritual. HR said if he didn't come onto company property, there was nothing they could do. The police said if he didn't threaten me explicitly, he was free to exist in public space. My therapist said I was right to feel violated, and we should work on boundaries and coping strategies. In the end, the only boundary that mattered was the one between something bad could happen and something bad happened. That line has not been crossed. Not yet. That's the horror. He's still out there. Not every day now. Winter came, then spring, then he skipped a few weeks like any other creature with habits and limitations. But he always comes back in November. He never came into my building, never touched me, never broke a law anyone was willing to name. He just sat and looked and waited, like someone who knows that eventually, inevitably, life will hand him a tragedy with my name on it, and when it does, he'll be able to say, "This is what I was waiting for." Every November afternoon now, around 5:03, I feel my skin prickle, whether I'm at that job or not. I don't look out the window anymore. I don't want to know who might be sitting outside whatever building I'm in, assigning me a role I never auditioned for. People think stalkers are obsessed with your beauty, your personality, some special quality that draws them in. Sometimes they're just obsessed with what you represent. A system that failed them, a letter that ruined them, a date on a calendar when their life broke. And sometimes the only thing keeping them from stepping over the line is whatever story they're telling themselves that requires them to wait. Not yet.
Thanks for spending Thanksgiving here with me, in the quiet spaces where gratitude and dread blur together. These stories weren't about ghosts or legends. They were about the way ordinary people crack under pressure, how family secrets rip open at the worst possible moment, and how a holiday built on togetherness can turn into a stage for the truths no one wants spoken. This time of year, houses glow warm from the outside, but inside there are screen doors that open without a sound, poisoned plates passed across tables, strangers carrying your last name, and confessions that undo decades of silence. As you move into the season, listen closely, to knocks, to footsteps, to the pauses between words at the table, and stay wary, because Thanksgiving isn't done with you yet.